And 3, 2, action.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So, I'd like to start by asking you to just tell us your story.
Well, I have incurable metastatic prostate cancer. And briefly, I was having annual checks, prostate-specific antigen, PSA, which is a marker of prostate cancer. And in the year 2000, my level for the first time was above normal. It was about 6.5 and normal's 4 or below. So my doctor told me to go to a urologist to check to see if there was a problem. And the urologist biopsied my prostate gland, and he discovered that I had a very aggressive form of prostate cancer. And he told me to go, my urologist then scheduled an operation to remove the prostate gland. He opened me up and he did a biopsy of nearby lymph nodes, and that disclosed that the cancer had spread to those lymph nodes, which meant that if he removed my prostate gland, I would still have cancer. And because every operation poses risks, and because my cancer would not be eradicated, he sewed me back up and he suggested that I go to an oncologist. And I knew that Johns Hopkins University Hospital in Baltimore was an excellent place for people with prostate cancer. And this was back, as I said, in 2000, and it was before Johns Hopkins took over Sibley Hospital. So the result was I had an oncologist there, Mario Alfredo Eisenberger. And he was a wonderful, incredibly experienced man, a very humane doctor. And for many years, he was my doctor. And he prescribed hormone therapy. And in addition, I had external beam radiation. And the result was, for about 10 years, my cancer was in remission. But then in January of 2011, about 7 years ago, I had a full body bone scan and a CAT scan of my thorax, abdomen, and pelvic area, and that disclosed that the cancer had spread. So that meant it had metastasized. And after that, I had various therapies. I had some clinical trials, and starting in 2015, I came under the care of a doctor here at Sibley Hospital, Channing Judith Paller, and I've been under her care since then. And what she has done is she has put me in a couple of clinical trials. I had other therapy, and the most recent clinical trial I had involved adding to standard chemotherapy megadoses of vitamin C. And this worked for quite a while, but eventually my cancer spread again. And so just recently she has put me on a dual chemotherapy using 2 different drugs. So that's basically the story of where I am today.
So, Jim, you were diagnosed with cancer in 2000?
That's correct.
So that's 17 years ago?
Nearly 17 and a half years ago, that's right. And I can tell you that Dr. Eisenberger told me, after he examined me and put me on this regime of treatment, that medical journals indicated that people in my situation lived on average 9 years, which means, some more, some less. But the most important thing he told me was that the medical journal articles were based on trials and other studies which had been done some years ago. So the result was, because in the interim other drugs and other therapies had been devised, it was likely that someone in my situation would live more than an average of 9 years. And he joked with me that he had a patient who was 20 years on after his therapy, and I told him that I was going to hold him to that, and I expected to live at least 20 years. So far, he and I are in an unusual situation as a result.
Did you bet anything?
I didn't hear you, Al.
Oh, no, I was joking, but did you bet anything with him?
I didn't have a bet with him, no. But periodically I send him an email and tell him I'm still alive. And anyway, Dr. Paller and her oncologists here at Sibley and the ones up at Hopkins in Baltimore, they talk to each other frequently. I even think they have weekly meetings together. And so he's well aware of my situation. But I haven't inquired of Dr. Paller whether he's getting a little nervous now. But of course, there's no money at stake, contrary to what you inquired about.
No, I would say like a nice dinner or something.
So, Jim, can you tell us how it felt to be told all those years ago that you had cancer?
Well, my first shock, I would call it this, came with my urologist. Because before I went under the knife, so to speak, he told me, if you wake up after an hour and a half in the recovery room, that means I didn't remove your prostate gland, which means it had spread beyond the prostate. And if you wake up after 2.5 hours, that means I remove your prostate gland. So as soon as I woke up in the recovery room, I looked at the clock and I said to myself, I have incurable cancer. And it was kind of frightening because I wasn't sure how long I would live. I hadn't yet met Dr. Eisenberger, but the doctor assured me that there were ways that medical oncologists could help me. But the longer I lived after that, the less frightening it seemed, just because for so many years, as I said, I was in remission and I basically forgot the fact that I had cancer at all, except for having oncologist appointments for a while. But now that I've lived with this disease for so long, I guess I'll tell you this. If you know you have a mortal disease that's going to kill you, it gets you thinking about your life and what can happen. And what I have found is that you can't let cancer by itself define who you are. There's so much more in life. And so I tried to think of all the things in life that gave me pleasure, and I tried to think of how grateful I was for what I had. And that has been enormously helpful. I'd like to recount to you some of those things, some of the experiences I had and what was going through my mind. When I was diagnosed with incurable cancer back in 2000, neither of my 2 children was married. Now, 17 years later, both my children are married. They have their own families. I have 4 grandchildren. And they are incredibly important to me. I think about them every day. And that gives me great pleasure. Another thing is my relationship with my wife. We've been married for 51 years, and knowing that I have cancer, that I'm going to die of it, has made our time together all the more precious. And so I'm so grateful for that. And my wife and I have been very happily married for a long time. We laugh a lot. I just feel like a soulmate, and I cannot imagine living in a world without her in it. But this love that I have for my wife, I have to confess to you, is tempered, is tinged with sadness. And the greatest sadness comes from the fact that many years ago, I remember this so clearly, I promised my wife that I would outlive her so she would never have to live alone. And I know now, eventually, I'm going to break that promise. But the fortunate thing is, it's also true that at the same time back many years ago, she promised me that she would outlive me and that I would never have to live alone. So the result is, we made these joint promises and we knew that one of us would violate them. But I think about that often because it makes me sad. I mean, I knew I couldn't be certain I would keep that promise, but I made it to her. So that's another thing, that my wife has been so important to me in my life, as anyone's wife is, and I treasure that greatly. Now, I would be less than honest with you if I didn't say that she and I have our spats and our strong words, but eventually these end in apologies and laughter, and so she's been a great support. And another important thing that's happened is that many of my friends, of course, have learned that I have cancer, and I've been in touch with them by phone and by email and even by snail mail sometimes, and it's just wonderful because they've been so supportive of me, and I think that this has another thing that's a part of my life that is not cancer, it's related to cancer, but it reminds me of what's so important in life. And the final thing I want to mention is something that occurred to me when I was thinking one day of a few friends of mine who had died suddenly of a heart attack or in a car crash. And I thought, those people, those friends of mine, never had an opportunity to talk to their friends and their family the way I have had to talk to mine. So the irony here is that knowing that I'm going to die and having known that for many years has given me an incredibly rich opportunity to talk to my friends and to tell them how much I treasure their friendship. So those are the kind of things that occur to me when I think I have this mortal disease, because there's so much more to life, and the opportunities that I've had to enjoy this life that I've been going through for over 17 years are so precious to me.
Thank you, Jim. So you've spoken a lot about your family and your friends, and particularly...
I'm sorry, can you speak a little louder?
I said you've spoken about your family and your friends and your wife particularly. If you had an opportunity to say something to Dr. Channing Pala, what would you say to her?
There's so many things I would say to her, and some of the things I have already said to her.
I apologize. Could you say that one more time, but with the doctor's name?
Pardon me?
Could you say that one more time, but with the doctor's name? So,
Yeah.
I'd say, I'd say to
What
Dr.
would I
Channing Pala, yeah.
I would say to Dr. Channing Pala so many things. She is a remarkable oncologist. She is a remarkable human being. Here's one example. I'll get around to what I would say to her, but I want to tell you one thing that she said to me once, which just struck me enormously, and that is this. I asked her, what is the thing she likes most about being an oncologist? And she said, I love talking to my patients, helping them plan their vacations. I love talking to them about the vacations they've been on and other important things in their lives, like birthdays or anniversaries. And what that showed to me is she too is trying to remind people that cancer is not all there is in your life. There's so much more. And to remind a cancer patient of that is to do an enormous service, because some people become preoccupied with the bad things, the frightening things, the sad things in their lives. But you have to remember there's so much more. So I would say to her, I'm very grateful for that simple comment. I'm grateful for the fact that she is totally devoted to her patients, and she is exceptionally responsive when I have been in touch with her. She has an amazing trove of knowledge about not only prostate cancer, which is my cancer, but she's also a genitourinary oncologist, so she also deals with kidney cancer, bladder cancer, testicular cancer. She has shown time and again that she really, I think, understands her patients, and I don't know any of her other patients, but I know she understands me and what my needs are, both my needs as a patient and my needs really as a fellow human being who's on a different path from what she's on, obviously. So those are some of the things that I would say to her and have said to her. And I'll tell you something else I said to her once. I told her how grateful I was for all that she had done for me, because she has extended my lifespan and she's enabled me to have all of these experiences with my family and friends that I've told you. And I told her once that, how shall I put this? I'm trying to remember the exact words. I told her that because I was so grateful to her, I wanted her to know, even though I'm 75 years old, and she must be at least 40 years younger than I am, I told her that when I grow up, I want to be like her.
That's great.
Here's one thing, Jim, it has something, it has all to do with the interview.
Can you speak a little louder?
Yeah, sorry. This guy is always telling me that we should get two cameras to shoot these interviews, and we never do it. And I think your answer to the previous question was amazing, and I would just love, and I don't know what you think, Ryan, if we could change the camera a little bit and maybe get a different angle.
Sure. Absolutely.
Because
I've finally inferred we're off camera now.
Whenever you're ready,
Great.
go for it.
So Jim, before we got interrupted, you said you missed two things that you wanted to say, two anecdotes, I think. Do you recall what those
Yeah.
were?
I'm trying to think how to segue into them. What about, I'll try to think of a question for you to ask me to,
Okay. What are they about? Maybe I can help.
how about if you say something like, can you tell us any more about these psychological and emotional effects you've described? Is that okay?
Yeah.
That's vague enough to allow.
Well, I think if you could actually open with that to say the psychological and emotional
Oh.
effects of, because I won't be.
But I've already said that before, but okay.
It's okay. That's
Okay.
okay.
Still helps. Go for it.
Go for it.
Okay, ready?
Mhm.
So there are a couple of other psychological and emotional effects that I could describe to you, and they relate to that great amorphous but such important concept of love, because when you're faced with mortal disease, you find how important it is to have the interchange with people and the deep affection that you feel. And there are two sayings or comments that always come to my mind. One of them is a laugh line by Woody Allen, and that is, love is the answer. I'm not sure what the question is, but love is definitely the answer. And I always liked that until one time my mother-in-law, many years ago, made a remark, just offhand really, that my wife and I have never forgotten, and that was this: there's a strange and wonderful thing about love, because no matter how much love you give, there's always more where that came from. It just never runs out. And it was such a wise comment, and I've never forgotten it. And that is one of the things that has helped keep me, I won't say keep me going, but it's helped me realize how there's so much more important in life than just saying you're a cancer victim. And I don't feel that I'm a victim, because a victim to me is someone who's a victim of a crime or a victim of something like that. It's not as though something or somebody bad is coming after me. It's just a fact of life. Some people get cancer. In some cases, the cause is very clear. Smokers get lung cancer, asbestos workers get cancer. But prostate cancer is one of those things, like some cancers, where it could just be a defect in your genes, a mutation. So I don't consider myself a victim. It's just one of the things that can happen to you in life. And that helps me try to keep what I hope is a proper perspective on my situation.
So the 3rd of June is National Cancer Survivors Day. and there are a lot of people in your situation. There are also a lot of people who have managed to beat cancer. If you could tell them something, what would you say to other survivors of cancer or other people that are in your situation?
Well, if by survivor of cancer you mean someone who has survived in the sense that he or she no longer has cancer or has been in remission for many years, I will say more power to you. I have a cousin, I just was talking with her on Skype yesterday, and she had breast cancer, and she has been in remission for about 6 years. And I asked her how she's doing, and she said, well, I'm still in remission and I feel good, but she knows that it may come back. So I would say to all people who have cancer, whether they regard themselves as victims, whether they regard themselves as survivors, to try to follow, if it works for them, what I've described what works for me, which is to somehow reconcile yourself to the fact that you've had cancer, you may die from it, you may be a survivor, but try to focus on what gives you pleasure in life. Try to be satisfied with what you have, because that can give you great courage, it can give you great hope. It's not a false hope, but it's hope.
Great, thank you. So, you've spoken a lot about what you're grateful for, the people in your life that have made an impact on you. How would you like to spend the rest of your time? How do you envision the rest of your time in your life?
Well, it's interesting that you ask that, because I haven't often asked myself that. And the way I'd like to spend my time is, by and large, the way I've described you already, that I have been spending my time. But there are a few things that I haven't mentioned, and one is this. When you don't know how long you're going to live, you have to ask yourself, when you're doing anything, do I really want to be doing this? And one effect that this has had on me is, I used to read a lot of books, and a lot of them were long and technical books. I love cosmology and I love economics, and I once got 1,600 pages into Marcel Proust's long novel, Remembrance of Things Past. I find now that I'm a little reluctant to get involved in a long project like that, like reading a long book or doing anything that'll take a long time, unless it seems incredibly important. Because number one, it could be crowding out other things that I might regard as more important. And even spending all that time, I've always wanted to resume at the beginning Marcel Proust, which is 3,200 pages long. But and I started it once, and I got about 200 pages into it, and I thought, I think maybe I should be doing other things, because this is taking up too much of my time. So that's the ironic thing. When you know your time is limited, but you don't know what the limit will be, you find, certainly I find, that I ask myself often, should I be doing this? So that's something that younger people and people who don't feel they're facing death may not think that much of. But that's been a change in my life. It doesn't bother me that much, but I do miss reading these books that I used to read that most people thought were boring. I especially like nonfiction. My wife is the fiction reader in the family. So that's what I would say in response to your question.
Thank you. I'm looking for some more things to pull out. Like we got such good stuff.
I just would have Jim repeat the whole thing again. No, Jim, thank you very much. I just love the conversation around.
You want me to talk more about the people here at Sibley that I run into? Since this is partly in marketing.
It's partly in marketing, but I think your story is really fascinating. If you want to tell us more about them, please do. They will be like that. No, we love that. I love to grab a beer at some point, but that's me. I think what you gave us in terms of focus and appreciating life and that perspective is amazing. but for sure, if you can tell us about people at Sibley that will.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the people at the hospital who have helped you
Okay.
on your journey.
Okay. We've been recording all of this already.
Yeah.
So, I mentioned earlier in response to your question some of my comments about Dr. Paller. So I'd like to broaden that and talk about Sibley Hospital and my experience here, because, as I mentioned, it was back in around 2015 that my care was really transferred from up in Baltimore at the Johns Hopkins University Hospital with Dr. Eisenberger down here to Dr. Paller. And I've lived in this area for a long time, and for a long time when I have lived in the Washington area, Sibley Hospital was a community hospital. And when Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore took it over, it transformed it enormously because, for example, the Sidney Kimmel Cancer Center is here now. There's also one in Baltimore. There's also one at Suburban Hospital in suburban Maryland. And so the range of services here at Sibley has mushroomed. And so you have all of these oncologists, of whom Dr. Paller is but one, who are experts in all kinds of cancer. And the result is you can have, as I have had, clinical trials right here conducted out of Sibley Hospital. You don't have to go to Baltimore. And the people I've found here, I've been at the Medical Oncology Infusion Center many, many times, and I found the nurses there and the other people who work there just exceptionally able and caring, and it's been a wonderful experience. And so I just wanted to mention that because it's very convenient for me. I mentioned earlier, I think, that I live only about a 20-minute drive from here, and when I was going to Baltimore, sometimes it would just take an hour and a half to get there. And so this has really been a godsend to the whole Washington area for anyone who has cancer.
Great, thank you. I actually want to take a step back and just talk a little bit about your grandkids that you mentioned. Tell me how you spend time with them.
Well, now this is interesting. A lot of the time we spend with them is on Skype or FaceTime. Our daughter lives in Chicago. She has one child, a son, Arthur, who's 11 years old. We sometimes go to Chicago, they sometimes come here, but much of our interaction with them is, in their case, actually more by telephone than by Skype, because our grandson loves to talk on the telephone, and he just goes on and on for an hour. But when he's on Skype, he gets distracted by things around the screen of the computer, and he loses interest in talking. Our son lives in London, and he has 3 children, and so we see him no more than 2 or 3 times a year, but we Skype with them frequently, usually about every 2 weeks. And they have 3 children. There's Eva, who's 16, and then there's Harold, who is 12, and then there's Alistair, the little one, who is 8. And so we have come to know them because we're all together at holiday time in December, right here, and everyone has a bed to sleep on in our house, although some of them are a bit primitive. But so we have many people in the house, but otherwise we don't see a lot of them in person, and it makes our times together in person all the more precious.
So it sounds like your family is spread out. How did it impact them when you were going through the worst part of your disease?
Well, I took to the habit of sending emails, first just to my family, about every month or so, telling them what I was doing, and they would sometimes reply by email, sometimes we talk on the telephone, and then I expanded that eventually to friends. So now there are probably about 50 people who are getting these emails, and that provides a link that's very important. It's not face-to-face, but it's by telephone or by email exchanges. So that's really how we communicate with our family, and it's been wonderful. I mean, you know, before email, before Skype, it would just be telephone calls, and to have something in writing and to be able to ponder it, I found that they enjoy that because it gives them a time to think about what they might ask me or talk about if they call or respond by email.
What do you say in your emails?
What do I say in my emails?
Yeah.
Well, I mainly tell them about what happened to me, if I have infusions, what the doctors told me, Dr. Paller. I tell them about side effects. For example, everybody knows that when you have chemotherapy, you almost always lose all your hair, and so what you're seeing today is 1 year's worth of growth. The last time I had a haircut, which was when all of the little strands of hair, few as they were on my head that were remaining, were shaved off. So this is 1 year of growth, and my hair is probably less than an inch long. So I told them about that, and I told them in these emails about other side effects. For example, fatigue, peripheral neuropathy, which is a loss of sensation or tingling in your fingers and toes, and I've had that in my feet. And in addition, my legs have become weak, and it's hard for me to walk quickly. It's impossible for me to run because my legs are too weak. And they always want to know about those things. And I also tell them about how I feel. Some of the things that I've told you today about how I feel, I tell to them because I think it's important that they know.
Thank you. So you say you've got 50 people on that email.
Well, some of them live in the same household, so I probably send only about maybe 30 emails or so.
Okay.
And I just actually sent one right after Dr. Paller and I were jointly interviewing each other, you might say, about a week ago for the National Public Radio's so-called StoryCorps program. And that email was probably 7 single-space pages because I wanted to tell them, you know, some of the things that I've been telling you about our exchanges in those emails. And some of what she said, which I'm not competent to explain here, is the more technical aspects of why the clinical trial I had, which involves megadoses of vitamin C in addition to chemotherapy, is more likely to be beneficial than chemotherapy alone. And she was also talking about likely new advances involving prostate cancer based on clinical trials that are going on now. So those are the kind of things that I put in that very lengthy 7-page single-spaced email to my family and friends.
Did you have a question?
No.
Thought you did. So coming back to your children, not so much your grandchildren who are somewhat younger, what would you say to your kids? Just as through your experience, what would you tell them? What would you leave them with? What
Well,
sentiment?
you know, I think when I was first diagnosed with cancer, and sometimes when they read about side effects of treatments I've had, they become worried, and I try to persuade them that they shouldn't worry. If I'm worried, I tell them, then perhaps you should be worried. But I'm not worried. My parents were both incredible worriers. My father to the extent of worrying about the fact that he was a worrier. And so I learned from that experience that worry is a wasted effort. You just shouldn't worry. And so that's what I've always told my children. I'm not worried, so you shouldn't be worried. And I try to give them the same positive attitude that I think I have, that you should be pleased with what you have, and I'm pleased with what I have, and I love my children as any parent would, and that's basically what I try to tell them.
How old are they? Who is he?
Our son is 50 years old. My wife and I started early. When he was born, I was 24 years old, my wife was 22.
Wow.
And he is an economist. He works for a worldwide company in London, Oxford Economics, which is an economic forecasting and modeling firm, which has clients all over the world and has offices on at least 4, possibly 5 continents. And he has a staff of about 9 economists, and they do all kinds of studies. And our daughter, the one who lives in Chicago, is an art historian. She has a PhD from Harvard in art history, and she is a curator at the Art Museum at the University of Chicago, the Smart Museum of Art. And in addition, she holds a faculty position in the art history faculty. It's not a tenure track job, but she can teach 1 course every semester if she wants to. So our children are both academic types, but they're not in the professoriate. Our daughter is closest, she works at a university, but she's not a teacher, she's not a professor except for this appointment she has. So we consider ourselves so fortunate, my wife and I, because we've learned so much about economics and art history from our children. And that's one of the things that I love to read about. I was always interested in economics, but art history I've just found fascinating. And going with our daughter to museum is just thrilling to hear her comment on paintings and other works of art.
Great.
So you can see that's one of the reasons why I'm such an optimistic and I feel I'm a fortunate person.
Have you ever told you how I feel optimism is a force.
You feel that optimism is
like a force of good. Do you think it has somehow affected, like you obviously have outlived every expectation. You're here after, some 18 years. Do you think your optimism is part of what has helped you carry through?
Well, my optimism has definitely helped me. And I don't think it's a false optimism, although pessimists would probably think so, just as optimists think that pessimists don't see what there is to feel grateful for in life. But it has obviously helped me in the sense that if I were not an optimist, perhaps I would be a pessimist. And perhaps it goes back to seeing how much my parents worried, and I just felt it was a wasted effort. Now, you can be an optimist and yet realize that you're in a very difficult situation. I mean, I am an optimist, and I realize that I'm in a very difficult situation. But if I obsess about it, maybe I'll verge into becoming a pessimist, and I just see as Huckleberry Finn said, there ain't no profit to it. There isn't any profit, in my mind, to being a pessimist. And if you can find your way to look on the brighter side of life, well, it'll help you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Actually, one last thing. I know we just talked about optimism, but through it all, obviously you're optimistic, but I feel like what you bring is a sense of hope, right? Through everything that you've been through, you remain hopeful and inspiring, right? Is there anything, can you talk to that?
I do remain hopeful. I don't think it's a false hope. But I think some people say hope can never die. Hope can never, never die. And if hope dies, then what's the point? Now, to me, that sounds a little like a false hope, because hope can die. I mean, when I'm on my deathbed actually dying, I know that's the end, but I'll still be there thinking about how grateful I am for what I've had in my life.
And how you've lived, especially the last.
Pardon me?
And how you've lived with your disease for so long, and I don't know. I think it's a different hope. I think hope never dies. really, I think. if-
Hope never dies until the person who has
Yeah.
that hope dies.
But. You
But
said
I would say
time.
that I would say this one thing. I look at you and I look at myself in the mirror, and you are all far younger than I am. If I were your age, and if I had the cancer I have, I think I would probably have a different view. I think it's hard. I mean, I have known people who have died at a young age of cancer. I had a dear friend who died of breast cancer at the age of 44. And I have known people who have died at younger ages. And I'm glad that didn't happen to me. And I probably would have had a different point of view. So part of what I'm telling you may not work for people who are very young who have cancer, which is incurable, because they think of all that they will be missing in life. If they are not married, if they don't have children, if they don't have grandchildren the way I have, I think it would be very hard for them to contemplate that they would never enjoy those wonderful things. So for anyone who's listening who thinks that maybe I'm a little too optimistic, I will say to you, if you are much younger than I am, I can understand that. And I hope if you do have cancer, you can somehow still come to terms with the fact that you just have to learn somehow to accept it, difficult though that is. And the younger you are, I think the more difficult it is to accept it. But it's so important because, as you suggest, if you give up hope and you say to yourself, I'm 44 years old, I'm 28 years old, and I'm going to die, you feel your life is over before you die.
It's great advice.
I feel like this is amazing. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thanks a lot.
Brian, anything
Okay.
more from you?
No, I think this is great.
Yeah.
So as we say,
Thank you.
this is a wrap.
Yeah.
I have